Multi-hazards, all about protecting communities.
This ain't no one-way ticket. Welcome to the thicket of brainwaves and epiphanies, grown men crying and matriarchs winning. Join this fight to protect your kin, your knaves, strong and weak, especially the vulnerable. Multi-hazards is in the house. I ain't here to give you a run-around bull. Join us, friends, sign up to battle. Climate change, human rage, all the sheep and all the cattle. Playing games while nature flames, floods and blows with all the cracks and hacks and terror foes. We're here to win. Hello, this is the Multi-Hazards Podcast, where we take a deep dive into issues in emergency management, climate change adaptation, security, etc. And the overall goal, I've stated so many times here, but it is protection, protecting communities. So welcome. Vin Nelson here. I'm the host of Multi-Hazards, and today I am very, very excited. I'm eager to have a special guest. This is Dr. Robin Cox. So she is the program head for the graduate programs in climate action leadership. So this is a graduate diploma and also a Master of Arts awaiting final approval of the British Columbia government, and a professor in the disaster and emergency management graduate programs of the School of Humanitarian Studies. And just to let you know, this is all at Royal Roads University in Victoria, British Columbia, the west coast of Canada. So Dr. Cox is also the director of the Resilience by Design, the RBD Research Innovation Lab, a transdisciplinary research and educational outreach center that focuses on building multi-general climate action leadership and competencies. So the goal of this center is to inform, inspire, and support the well-being of people and the planet in a changing climate through research, education, and policy advising. So for experience, Dr. Robin Cox is an active researcher with multiple nationally funded research projects. She leads the Adaptation Learning Network, ALN, a 3-year, $2 million project funded by Natural Resources Canada and the British Columbia, or we call it BC, Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy. This project is building climate adaptation capacity with organizations, professionals, businesses, and communities through professional development, training, and networking. So Dr. Cox is an experienced disaster psychosocial responder and researcher with expertise in individual and community level resilience and trauma. So for credentials, Dr. Cox holds a PhD in counseling psychology from the University of British Columbia, 2007, and held a postdoctoral fellowship at the Michael Smith Foundation for Health Research, Simon Fraser University, 2007. She received the Kelly Outstanding Teacher Award from Royal Roads University in 2016. Well, dear listeners, it's my custom here on each Multi-Hazards podcast to pronounce a territorial acknowledgement out of deep respect for the First Nations people on whose land I podcast, here in the suburbs of Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. I'm using the text from the nearby Kwantlen Polytechnic University, and people also call it KPU. So here we go. We work, we study, we live in a region the south of the Fraser River, which overlaps with the unceded traditional and ancestral lands of the Kwantlen, Musqueam, Katzie, Semiahmoo, Tsawwassen, Kikite, and Kwikwetlam peoples. These are the names of various First Nations groups around me here in Greater Vancouver on the west coast of Canada. Now, without further ado, let's get to the interview. So welcome, everybody. This is Multi-Hazards, and we're here again for another wonderful interview. Today, we have Dr. Robin Cox, and she is actually, if you would jump in an a helicopter in Vancouver and you fly over the, what do they call it now? It's called the Salish Sea to Vancouver Island. There's a city there called Victoria, which is the capital of British Columbia, Canada. So good morning, Robin. How are you today? And she's given me permission to call her by the first name, everybody, just to let you know. How are you doing today? And I heard that it's kind of like mixed over there, a little cloud, a little sun.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm fine. And I live here on the unceded territories of the Algonquin and Kosamson speaking peoples, Songhees and Esquimalt. So I'm very privileged to be in this beautiful part of the world and to be able to work and play here where Royal Roads University is, my employer, and very happy to be here.
Okay. Now, I have to admit, I was trying to understand your background because not only you're doing something with disaster and emergency management, and then now you've got a climate action leadership, but then I looked at, you've got a PhD in counseling psychology, and then health research. So it's kind of like maybe is all over the map, or maybe it's actually one road with different branches like a tree. So I'm just wondering, first of all, if you could tell us briefly about your background and why you chose this field.
Sure. And I would say the analogy for me is more the latter. I have a degree, a doctorate in counseling psychology, that's correct. And I worked as a counseling psychologist in the field, focusing on stress and coping and trauma, working with Vancouver Police and other counseling agencies in Vancouver. And while I was doing my counseling work, I was recruited to participate in the psychosocial parts of disaster response. And all that means is, the psychological, emotional, and social aspects of responding to disasters. I went down to New York City following 9/11 and also responded here in British Columbia, the province that I live in, and also in Alberta, the neighboring province, to a number of disasters offering psychosocial support. So during that time, I returned to do my doctorate at the University of British Columbia, and I focused my work on disasters and disaster research. My doctoral work looked at the disaster recovery process in communities affected by wildfires in the interior of British Columbia. So it really became a focus of my work that was very congruent with my degree in psychology. Following that, I have deepened my focus and my research. I have a lot of research experience working and thinking about and researching disasters, and began teaching and helped design the MA program, master's program in disaster and emergency management at Royal Roads University. While working there, and I've been working there for about 13 years, doing research with my research lab, the Resilience by Design Research Lab, and teaching in the Master's in Disaster Emergency Management program, it became clear to me that to focus on disasters without focusing on climate wasn't sufficient. Climate change is amplifying and accelerating natural hazard disasters and impacting every aspect of society, even though here in North America, we're more protected from it right now, or from seeing it, because of our economic privilege and because many of the impacts are being felt in more remote parts of our country, such as the Arctic and coastal areas, etc. So it was a very natural fit for me to bring together these focuses on disaster risk reduction and focusing on climate action and climate resilience. They're intimately connected, and my research focuses on working with professionals and working with young people to really cultivate an awareness of climate change and how it's impacting us, and climate adaptation and resilience, with this intersecting goal of reducing the risks that we face from natural hazards like wildfires, sea level rise, and flooding.
That's wonderful. Actually, 2 years ago, I had the same kind of, I call it epiphany. And I decided that if I'm going to spend the next 20 years, the last 20, 30 years of work life, because I'm almost 53, then I'm going to do something for my kids. I'm going to do something for my community. I do something I've wanted to do my whole life. And then I decided I'm going to study both emergency management and climate change. So I got into Waterloo's climate risk. It's a graduate 4-course diploma. And then I did few diplomas at Justice Institute here in Vancouver. But the strange thing is, once I was looking for jobs in emergency management, I remember, well, there's one place in Vancouver, I kept sending resumes and they kept ignoring me. I asked them for information and kept ignoring me. But then I looked online and said, oh, they have a lot of contracts with natural gas and oil companies. And maybe they saw climate change on my resume and they're, we don't want this guy in. And I even had another interview at a chemical company. And the last, sort of off script, the interviewer asked me, hey, what do you think about the pipeline? Are you for or against? And I was kind of shocked. I was like, what? This is like modern time? That's something from the 60s. They would ask something like that. Well, isn't it? What are you asking me this question for? So I thought, wow, I thought that climate change would be kind of a door opener for me, but it ended up becoming a door shutter for me. And I was kind of like, whoa. But I said, whatever. Climate change is the reason I'm getting into this field, because it's real. Right? It's not a joke.
It's clear we're caught in a climate emergency. Many municipalities across Canada and across the globe have declared a climate crisis. And we know that it's already impacting nation states in the global south. It's impacting areas of the global north, as I said, the Arctic being one of them. But it is here, it is real. And we have a small and narrowing window of time to try and slow it down through our mitigation, a reduction of global greenhouse emissions, and to build up our capacity to adapt to those risks that we can't avoid, and to build our resilience in the context of a lot of uncertainty and the growing and accelerating impacts on our society, whether those are economic impacts, social, political, environmental. And I think, although the COVID-19 pandemic is not necessarily directly associated with, or most people would not associate it with, climate change, what we do know about climate change is these kinds of viruses are going to become more frequent and more possible, with greater possibility of pandemics. And the same underlying issues have contributed to and exacerbated the pandemic. Things, political issues, economic systems, our reliance on global supply chains, etc. So these things all intersect. They're all complex challenges. And as we move forward and try, if we're willing to look at that square in the face, and I think COVID has really, in many ways, pushed us to facing some of those deep systemic problems that we know exist, racism and inequities economically. We will be building resilience not only to COVID specifically, and not only to specific natural hazard related disasters, but also to climate change. And I think these are really important issues. And while there is still resistance to accepting that climate change is here, I would say the vast majority of people get it. And I think one of the things that we've watched with the COVID-19 pandemic is people really turning to science and evidence to inform their decisions. And that's what we really need to do when it comes to climate change, is to look at the evidence, to look at the science, and understand what is happening with the climate, what is contributing to global warming, and how those results are going to impact us, what the risks are, and then drawing on evidence-informed practices to address them. So I think it's important that we move forward with that commitment to acting and leading actions that will address these things, regardless of whether some people either choose not to get it or don't understand it, or it's just not a priority for them. I think we've seen lots of evidence that for young people, it's a priority with the climate strikes. And now those have obviously been slowed down because of the pandemic. But there are many, many, many young people in the world looking at their current and future lives and recognizing that this is an emergency and that we need to be acting now.
Right, exactly. I can just recall when I was younger, I took trips to Vietnam, to China, to Thailand, to other places. And then I thought, wow, beautiful landscape. But then look at those pollution clouds. Look at the plastic in the river. But then I came back to Vancouver and I'm like, whoa, look at those big trucks on Main Street spewing out all that smoke. Look at the Fraser River when you're on a bridge and you see just clouds of pollution smoke going down. You look in the river and it's dirty. You can see chemicals, so oil. So it's kind of like this is a global plague. And wow, we need to be working on it because it doesn't look like a lot of the industries are stopping putting out that smoke and that stuff in the air and into the water. So now I'm wondering, you've already told us your role at Royal Roads, but there's something called the Adaptation Learning Network, ALN. And then there's Resilience by Design. So are they the same things or is there two different roles here?
Okay, so I have a research lab. It's a collaborative research lab called the Resilience by Design Lab. And the Resilience by Design Lab is focused on cultivating climate change makers and understanding and mainstreaming climate resilience and disaster resilience. So it's a lab and it involves, and we have a number of large funded research projects that focus either with youth or with professionals. One of those projects is the Adaptation Learning Network. And the Adaptation Learning Network, which is funded by Natural Resources Canada and the BC Ministry of the Environment and Climate Change Strategy, is focused on building the capacity in British Columbia for adaptation. And its focuses with professionals such as landscape architects, engineers, planners, biologists, foresters, people who are working on the front lines of climate change and helping them to develop the knowledge and skills they need to integrate a consideration of climate change into their thinking, into their plans and their initiatives. This is part of a national initiative, and it will be very much in line with BC's upcoming climate adaptation strategy, which is being developed this year, and I believe will launch at the end of 2020. I'm not sure how COVID will impact that. But so the Adaptation Learning Network is about bringing professionals together, bringing professionals in every discipline, in every sector together to share their thinking and knowledge and to increase that through not-for-credit programming. Royal Roads University is very much in the lead in that. The Resilience by Design Lab and the university are very much in the lead of that. But we also have brought in other post-secondary partners from British Columbia and professional associations to collaboratively decide what core topics need to be focused on and to use and to design courses, that online courses that will meet those needs and will seed the early uptake of designing and delivering courses across the province, across post-secondary institutions, whether those are colleges or universities or technical institutes, because we understand, again, that it really is every sector of society that needs to be involved in the response to climate. And that requires building new skills and knowledge that can help address the uncertainty and the science of climate change, so that the decisions and plans and initiatives that we do now, whether that's building new buildings or deciding where and whether to build a road, whether it's about how we work in our forests or along the coastlines, whether it's about how businesses ensure that they can continue to do business. All of these things require an understanding of climate and climate change, and an understanding of adaptation and resilience, and some ideas and strategies and examples of how to integrate those into the work they're doing. So that's the Adaptation Learning Network. It's one of the projects of the Resilience by Design Lab, which is located at the Royal Roads University. It's a number. It's one of many. I'm also with the lab's involvement and with other people on campus at Royal Roads, designing a Masters of Arts in Climate Action Leadership, which will launch in 2021. And again, the focus there, again, is to really start building capacity to address these needs. You know, we urgently need experts in multiple areas and professionals in multiple areas to be working towards building our climate resilience and our adaptation capacity. And the program is designed to contribute to that. It's a very interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary program. It draws on the expertise of many different disciplines: business and communication, change management, an understanding of climate risk. And it's got some unique features to it that address the, I would say, a new and evolving desire of students to learn in dynamic ways, where they're working with real world problems. They're sharing their learning as they learn, so not having to wait until at the end of the program. And they're engaging with people nationally and globally as they learn, and to inform their thinking and to share their thinking. So those are two of the key initiatives of the Resilience by Design Lab. And I have others. We're just about to announce a new Social Science Humanities Research Council grant that will be working with youth here in Victoria and Puerto Rico to do similar work, to use design thinking and social innovation with youth to design and prototype some climate resilience initiatives in their communities.
Wow, that's wonderful. Because I remember 2 years ago, I was looking for climate change programs, and University of Waterloo, I think, was the only one I found. And then I wanted to do the Masters of Climate Change, but they're like, nope, you got to go to Ontario. And I'm like, I can't move away. So I ended up getting... Sorry?
Sorry, I interrupted you, but I was just saying that's one of the cool things with Royal Roads is that, you know, really for the last 25 plus years, Royal Roads has been delivering programming to professionals that doesn't require them to leave their communities, because it's they're mostly online, blended programs is what we call them. So there are some face-to-face learning intensives that students, well, pre-COVID, students would come to campus to do that kind of intensive learning for 2 or 3 weeks, and then they return to their communities. And part of that is to support people like yourselves who can't, you know, sort of pick up, leave their families, leave their jobs, and move to Ontario or wherever to take a graduate program. But it's also designed to ensure that as students are learning, they are drawing from their world, from their discipline, from their jobs, and sharing that learning in their existing networks. This kind of scholar practitioner model, which is different than many universities, which have more of a theoretical learning focus, which is also important, but it's not as geared to activating professionals in their disciplines with this learning.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. I myself was looking into the Master of Arts in Disaster and Emergency Management. What's it called? MADAM program. I have a master's already, and I'm like, how much education does one need, right? But I thought eventually, I'd like to get that master's just for myself. Just a side thing here. I was really fascinated. There's Lund University in Sweden. I don't know if you've seen them. They've got a master's of, it's both, I think they put three things in it. It's like climate change, adaptation, then they put disaster management and development. So I guess they're more focused on the European Union and the continents around, like Africa, Middle East, and a lot of development work. But I just thought it's time to put these fields together, because
correct.
you can't just, give climate adaptation to the city planners and the engineers, and then the emergency managers are just kind of like reacting to disaster after disaster. But what's the driver? I mean, climate change isn't the driver of everything, but it is one of the main drivers of increased disasters, whether by frequency or magnitude. So these have to merge somewhere along the road, and you're doing it.
Yeah. Well, trying to. I think, we know that resilience is now a core idea, concept in international, national, and local policies. And that includes the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And all of these individual international frameworks and the policies that flow from them at the national level in Canada and the provincial and municipal levels are integrating this understanding that, resilient communities and societies need to be addressing all three of these things at the same time, and they do intersect. You're quite right. So one of the roles of the Resilience by Design Lab and really the university is to start pushing that integration and understanding that these things do intersect, and we need to bust some of these silos so that people are working collaboratively together and understanding that we need to address disaster risk reduction. At the same time, we're addressing these sustainable development goals, and at the same time that we're looking at how to mitigate and adapt to climate change. And in point of fact, in most of these agreements, there's some recognition of that intersection. So, one of the sustainable development goals is around climate, and the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction also addresses not only disaster risk reduction, but resilience and climate. So these things are moving towards that kind of integration, and Royal Roads is really, I would say, and obviously I work there, but I think we really are trying to take the lead in that. You're right, there are very few programs, university programs, that focus on climate and climate adaptation and climate mitigation. The Waterloo program is a great program, and it's one of the only ones in Canada. And this new program, the MA in Climate Action Leadership, McCall, as I call it, is going to be unique. It's going to be the only program currently in Canada at the graduate level that addresses this understanding of the need to focus on mitigation, but not only on mitigation, and very much on adaptation and how we build resilience and adaptive capacity because of the nature of where we're at with climate change. There's a lag between when the climate changes and the actions that we take. And so we know that some of the risks that we face here in British Columbia and in Canada and the world are unavoidable. And so we need to be able to work to be resilient and adaptive in those contexts, to reduce the risks where we can, adapt to those that we can't reduce or eliminate, while at the same time we are working through our local and national and international policies to try to mitigate climate change through emissions reduction. But we can't do only one of those. We need to do both, and we need to acknowledge that the risks that we face, some of them are just unavoidable at this point, where the level of global warming is such that we know that those risks will happen, and that involves all kinds of impacts on our natural environment, on our economic environment, our societies, etc. So it's time that we, step up collectively and move forward in these areas with this is what I would say is a transdisciplinary orientation, where these disciplines inform each other and shift and work together rather than working in our traditional silos.
Mm-hmm. That's great. That's wonderful. Now, from your online presence, I sort of assumed, I sort of gathered that you have a vision for youth. So I'm wondering, why do you appear to be so set on inspiring and training youth? So why youth, everybody?
Right. Well, we know that, and young people know that they will bear the burden of climate change throughout their lives. They're growing up with climate change, and they are facing some of these risks that I've just described over the next 10, 20, 30 years, and beyond, depending on how successful we are mitigating climate change. And I would suggest that to date, we have not been that successful in mitigating it. It's a complex problem, but it also requires leadership and political will, and that's very hard to come by in many contexts. So young people will bear the burden of this, and young people, and we've seen much evidence of this, understand that and are actively leading the building the awareness through the climate strikes and through other actions. And so we're really committed to helping and amplifying young people's efforts and leadership in this area. They're also, I think, very much in their thinking, creative and less constrained by existing social norms and structures, etc. So there's a real sort of potential in working with young people to sort of help them build some skills around innovation and around understanding how to integrate evidence into policy and inform their actions with evidence and data, and to support and amplify their efforts, and to work with young people to help them engage with their peers and their communities to mainstream an understanding of climate change and climate action. So there's a lot of potential in working with young people, and there's a lot of urgency for them to have those skills and the capacity to act and lead. They're, in many cases, the leaders today. We know that they will definitely be the leaders of tomorrow, and they need to have the skills and knowledge and competencies to be able to lead climate actions and address these systemic issues, racism and inequity that will be exacerbated by climate change, and that are really in many ways fueling climate change, by our economic structures and the economic and social inequities that many people face, indigenous people, people of color, etc., in the world, and the inequity between the global north and the south. So these are really important issues that many young people understand, and often feel like many of us, sort of paralyzed in the face of and despairing. And so building up their ability to act and feel a sense of confidence and agency in their ability to influence policies and decisions, and to support them having meaningful engagement in this space is a critical issue. And the lab is very much committed to working to do that by climate, by action-oriented research, by working with young people to understand what engagement looks like from their perspective, what facilitates that, what the barriers are, introducing design thinking and other creative problem-solving methods so that they have the skills necessary as they move forward.
That is so necessary. And just a side note here, I think that youth today, like when I finished my studies at Simon Fraser University, so it's here in Vancouver, this is like way back, 1991, I had a hard time getting a job and people recognized me. And there seems to be I'm a little self-critical about Canadian culture. I think there's a little bit of looking down on youth in our culture. And I don't know if it's better now than 1991, but I don't think so. And youth now, actually, it's worse than, I finished Simon Fraser. I had to drive taxi cab, like 10-hour shifts, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, just to pay the rent, pay for food. I ate macaroni all the time because I couldn't afford food. It's harder now. Like I saw, it was like 2 years ago, even some of the students at Simon Fraser University, they're sleeping on campus. They can't even pay for rent. And I got to confess to you, I actually wept for like 20 minutes because I spent like 5 years on that campus, and I know that campus inside out on Burnaby Mountain. And it just broke my heart to see the things that young people are facing now. I've had children of my adult friends, and they've taken like over a year or 2 years to find a job. And I'm like, what is happening in our society, in our culture? And this is Vancouver. I don't know other parts of the world right now, what's the situation with youth, but I know that there needs to be this focus on youth, because it's like, they're young, they're good looking. They go on Instagram and said, hey, look at me, I'm having a good time. But that's just an outer shell, a veneer. Inside, there's economic hardship. There's really, really tough times. And even just getting jobs. I saw a job on the internet the other day. I'm pretty sure it was for climate change adaptation. They're asking for 15 years experience. And I laughed for like 2 minutes. I was like, okay, hire a senior. 15 years. We have to engage and change this culture and do something. And you're doing it. Sorry, that was just my little side note.
Definitely I and the other members of the lab and many other people are certainly contributing to trying to address that, as are young people themselves. And I agree that there are many people in the world, many of them young, who face inordinate challenges in these days. And again, I think that the pandemic that we're currently experiencing has exposed many of those, and certainly has had an economic impact, which is going to make job finding even that much more difficult. And in one sense, obviously governments and organizations need to be very much involved in that, trying to imagine how to not only restart our economy, but rework our economy in ways that create greater opportunities. Certainly during the COVID crisis, the idea of a universal basic income has been raised so that there is some capacity for young people and older people, for people generally, to be able to meet their basic needs, and then to look at how else they can contribute to society and to their own lives and their families. And I think as climate change and climate adaptation and climate resilience become more mainstreamed in our societies, more jobs will be opening up. But they're already opening up, and there's already, as you've just described, a demand and a growing demand by employers here and around the world for people who have some of these skills and knowledge related to climate change and climate adaptation. And I think we need to amplify that in many ways, and setting aside the challenges of being able to afford tuition. This is a great time to be going to school when the economy and the job prospects are low, to be able to reimagine and retool, develop some new skills. So it's not only about young people. I think it's about many people struggling to find their way in a new economic reality and a new economic context. And, one of the reasons that we have focused the Master of Arts in Climate Action Leadership in this blend of, climate and social sciences and leadership studies is to give these potential change makers the knowledge and skills they need to move into these roles, and to help Canada to move into a carbon neutral and resilient future faster, whether that's through activism, whether that's through policy and working in governments, whether that's through working in the corporate or the not-for-profit sector. That we need to be changing this culture, and we need to be supporting everyone, but particularly young people who, as I say, will be living out this reality for a much greater portion of their lives through education and skills development, through activism, through our attempts through policy and otherwise to change some of the systems that you've mentioned that create these very challenging and upsetting contexts in which young people and many people are living.
Right. Now, I saw a YouTube video from you, Robin, July 2017, and I have to admit, after watching for a few minutes, I was surprised because I've been around academics for many, many years, and I've worked in immigrant services, and I work at a local college now. So there's a kind of culture of what would we call it? Political correctness was the old word. It's just kind of like self-censorship. And a lot of people who have good jobs, get good pay, have good retirement savings and good insurance benefits, they seem very reticent to say what they really think, right? You know, maybe they'll get a fake name on Twitter and kind of tweet out some things just to kind of release their inner monster. But it's just like, I watched that video and said, wow, you're pretty straight to the point there. You're saying some things, right? For example, at the 4-minute, 20-second mark, you said disasters make some people, there's some people making money and then other people are suffering. And it kind of reminded me of this book I had heard on audiobook. It was Naomi Klein's Shock Doctrine,
Right.
saying that actually there are people, and it's kind of like the, who is the villain in Harry Potter movies? It was like the unmentionable name, but it's like the bad guys, the bad people, they're just waiting for a disaster to happen and then they'll make money off it. While other people, like they're dying, you know? So I was just kind of shocked. I was just wondering if you could explain more about that whole idea.
Well, sure. I mean, I think one of the things that we know about disasters is they're not equal opportunity events. Disasters happen, and many of them we have no chance to prevent in some cases. But we know that they exacerbate and expose patterns of vulnerability and inequity. And, you know, people who are who live with marginal incomes, who live in poverty, are often living in more vulnerable areas because those are less desired, or they're living in contexts and they can't afford house insurance, etc. And so we know that, and we know from examining many years of disaster research that again, you know, people who are marginalized long before a disaster happens are even more marginalized by that disaster. And you know, I teach a course on the human dimensions of disaster, and one of the things that we look at is a case study of Hurricane Katrina, which is some years ago, but it was a good example, bad example, I guess, really, but a good example from a researcher perspective of exposing those social and economic patterns of inequity and how those played out in a disaster. And so we know that that happens, and that's the same with climate change. We also know that many of those same patterns are fueling disasters because, you know, people will often use the term natural disaster. There's no such thing as a natural disaster. There are natural hazards, flooding, earthquakes, wildfires, etc. But they aren't inherently disasters. They become disasters when they intersect with humans' decisions and human, you know, where we live and how we build and where we build, and our choices around how the economy is run and who gets to, you know, make masses of money and who has to live in abject poverty. So these decisions that we make as humans actually create the disasters, and these are historic conditions around, you know, racism and choices in Katrina, the choices around how the levees were or were not reinforced and built, the choice, much of that by early on by slave labor. So, you know, these things are very much exposing and amplifying these issues. And so Naomi Klein's book on disaster capitalism and the shock doctrine really talks about this idea, this reality that there are entities are in our current economic system whose only driver is profit for shareholders. And so with that mentality, disasters provide an opportunity, because there's an opening, and in that unsettled and in the extreme changes and impacts of disasters, there's a hole in which people and corporations, etc., can enter and engage in ways to ensure that their profits are protected and or increased. Obviously, following a disaster, there's often lots of rebuilding and infrastructure development, etc. So there are people, corporations, etc., probably even some governments that take advantage of that. That is not to say that most people do that. Most people do not, are not coming at it from that perspective. But I think we have to be realistic about the economic systems, social and political systems that support that kind of, that support people and taking advantage of those kinds of situations. So that's what I was naming. And I think, I've talked about that there. I've talked about it in Mexico when I was presenting to the Commission on Environmental Cooperations, kind of like an environmental NAFTA in a way, because it's these kinds of things that we have to address. We can't just address the symptoms of a disaster by cleaning up and rebuilding. We can't just address the symptoms of COVID by creating a vaccine. Yes, that will be great. But as I've said, first of all, there's no vaccine for climate change. And even if there is a vaccine for something like COVID, there will be another version of that. And unless we address these underlying issues and conditions, we're just going to keep repeating it. We know from the research in Canada and globally, but in Canada, that the cost exponentially increasing. We're talking billions and billions of dollars, and that is being driven even higher by climate change. So we cannot economically afford that. We cannot economically afford the shutdowns that those kinds of disasters, increasing disasters both in magnitude and frequency, will cause. So we have to get into this preventative mode where we are reducing those risks and where we are actively addressing these systemic issues that create the opportunity for disaster capitalism to occur, that create the opportunities for these gross inequities to continue. So we need to move beyond rhetoric to actually taking action in that, or we're going to be in very, very, very bad shape. It's a catastrophic future we're looking at if we don't get ahead of that. So that's, again, why these initiatives that I'm engaged in with the Resilience by Design Lab, with Royal Roads University and the Disaster Management Program and the Climate Action Leadership Program are all about trying to support our collective capacity to get ahead of these things, to really make a difference, so that we can even think that we're going to have a resilient future, a world in which we want to live. We have crafted a relationship in our dominant culture, our dominant sort of Western European culture, where we think of nature as something outside of ourselves. We talk about nature, and we talk about nature often in terms of the resources that it provides us to, build our buildings and, fuel our cars and heat our homes. And this relationship with nature, this disconnection from our own, the fact that we are part of nature. We are a species. We have the same potential to be a species that thrives or a species that becomes extinct. We are part of nature. And until we address that disconnect, we're going to be in trouble. And I think we can look to other systems of thinking, like indigenous systems of thinking and worldviews, where there is a much more holistic understanding of the world and our place in it, and a much longer term perspective, a 7 generations forward perspective, where we're not only acting for ourselves and our immediate needs, but very much acting for the future of not only our children and their children and their children, but 7 generations ahead, and evaluating our decisions and our policies and our actions from that perspective. And that is what resilience is about. And that, it's doable. We can do it, but we need to be very intentional about it. We need to be very systematic about it, and we need to ramp up our efforts in all dimensions in order to get there. The window for our ability to mitigate some of these risks and to have a non-catastrophic future is closing, as climate scientists have been telling us for decades. And we are still not acting from